name is Paul Ressel, and basically what I'm going to do today is I'm going to play you a track that I created entirely in Maschine. That's using the Maschine software native, all the built-in components and software that comes with it. I'm going to basically play that track for you, and then I'm going to deconstruct it and just show you how I put it together, how the sounds came together, how you can basically use Maschine to put tracks together and sort of blur the lines between production and performance. So without further ado, I'm just going to get started. Okay, so I'm just going to basically deconstruct that track, like break it down into its different parts. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go through all the different groups. Each group allows you to store either one or multiple instruments, sample banks, plugins, whatever it might be. As you can see here, basically just starting with the beats. Basically, each group has a different sort of set of instruments that I've assigned to it. So the first group is the beat group. Just got all the different samples for the drums. So I usually like to have 2 kick drums set up next to each other because you can kind of work the patterns a little bit better. So I got those set up there. Snare, hi-hat, it's like a shaker, and a tom drum. And basically all these different sounds all come from the synth drum engine built into Maschine. So these aren't samples, this isn't from different sample libraries, it's all completely native. And for me, it's one of the strongest things about Maschine is that the sounds that it comes with basically are incredibly powerful and they just sound really, really good. So you can kind of see if we have to go into one of them. So just the kick drum, you basically got some different options. There's a whole bunch of different drum engines. So you can kind of just hear like how those sort of give you like different starting points in terms of like the sonic quality of the sound. And then you have the basic controls, things like the tune of the drum, things like decay, so you can kind of control the length of the actual kick itself, impact filtering, and each engine will have parameters unique to it, so you can really tweak and get your sounds the way you want it. Then I just have another kick drum, so I basically have those two together. And then the snare, you can basically see, control things like the decay, hi-hats, again, also just has a whole bunch of different engines that all have like a very unique sound. Percussion engine, and then the tom drum there at the top. Okay, so let me just solo the drums, just so you can kind of hear, like, we'll go through some of the processing I did on the drums, and then we can take it from there. So, okay. So there's a couple of different ways you can kind of put the drum beats together. If you go into pattern mode here, you can see I basically, if my head's not in the way, you can see I have a whole bunch of different patterns set up. Obviously, I try and like name everything to make sure that I know where everything is. So each one of these patterns basically allows me to sort of drop them in and out wherever I feel necessary in the song, which is great because you can have an arrangement set up, but then you can also completely alter your arrangement as you go. So if I had to go into one of these patterns, start here. So I just started with the basic sort of like kick snare pattern. And then sort of building on it, adding more detail into it, bringing in the hi-hat, bringing in the shaker, bringing in the tom, just having a slightly different sort of approach to the sound. Okay. So let's look at what's on the drum group in terms of processing. So again, Maschine comes standard with a whole bunch of different sounds in terms of things like saturation, distortion, compressors, a whole bunch of different reverb units, delays, things that are designed not only to work well in performance, but to work well in production. They just have an incredibly good sound. So just to go through some of the things I've put here on the drum group to kind of get it to sound better. So what I'll do first is I'm just going to bypass these sounds just so you can kind of hear it raw. And you can just hear like what each one's kind of bringing to it. So besides having plugins for each group, you can also have plugins on each individual sound. So if we go through, we can look at the snare drum, for example, there. So I've got the snare, and then I've got this sort of frequency modulation. Just adding sort of overtones to the overall sound. And then this sort of reverb unit as well, which you can control sort of the length of. And again, these sounds are just really simple to get into. And what I'm going to show you now, so I'm going to go to just the basic sort of beat, just the kick, hi-hat, snare. And I'm going to add, let's say I just want to add another instrument, just to add another level. So all I need to do is select an empty pad, and you can see I've got a whole bunch here. So I'm just going to select this pad over here, and hit Shift Browse, and you'll see it immediately brings up the core drum synths, okay? So let's just say I wanted to add a sort of another percussion track. Now there's a couple of ways you can basically play sounds in. You can either do it literally by hand, where you can sort of play things in. And again, you can obviously, there's a couple of different engines just in the percussion one. So you have fractal, there's a shaker, and you can completely control like how that sound comes together. There's different modes for the shaker. So again, you have a lot of control over the sounds themselves. Okay, so you can either do it by just playing it in by hand. So I'm just going to hit record. I'm going to make it a 4-bar loop. You see it picks up things like the velocity as well. It's very sensitive to that sort of thing. And another thing you can do on the fly is automate any of the parameters that are currently in there. So if I wanted to play with the release, for example, I just hold down the auto, and it'll remember all those moves. So I don't even have to stop playing while the stuff is going on. And basically now this will be a part of the pattern that I was currently on. Okay, so let's look on from the drums. I'm a guitarist. That's kind of how I got into music. So this sort of, for me, is quite an interesting way at approaching music, especially when you talk about sampling and looping. So the next part of the track that I put together was I wanted to play something on guitar to kind of sample it in and see what I could do with it. So the next bit is here. So if we had to go and look at the sample of that, so you can see basically it's already broken into sort of its constituent parts. So what it's done is it's mapped it out onto the keyboard so I can actually play it and make it a little bit more sort of usable. So no longer you have like just the one sample on itself that's a loop. You can basically cut it up into sections, replay it in, play around with it. So the way I had it set up now is just in a basic loop. And then basically what I did on top of that is I brought in another sampler. I played guitar again. So that sound was actually originally a guitar, which I sort of cut up and I basically changed the pitch of. And one of the coolest things about using the way that Maschine sort of deals with samples is you can basically select your samples, bring them in. I have them all on different pads here. And what I can do is I can just go to the tune engine here. And you can see there, I've taken it up basically an octave from the original. So the original sound was... So those are all the notes basically cut up and sampled from the guitar part that I played in. And I really like them just sort of an octave higher. So that kind of gave me the basis for the track. I had the drums, the guitar loop, and then the main guitar part. Okay, so the next thing I looked at was trying to bring some sort of some pads into it to basically just build it up and give it like a little bit more in terms of key and just really make it sonically a little bit more interesting to listen to. So what I brought in here, I'm basically using a Reactor plugin called Prism, which is basically a synthesizer, and this is the sound that I had. I don't know if you guys can hear that. So you can just hear really kind of like smooth. I just wanted something sort of just filling space in the background, basically. So at the moment, I have these 4 elements. I got my drums, I got the 2 guitar parts that I sampled, and the pad. So I'm just going to mute out the guitars for now because I want to show you what I did with the pad. So one of the greatest things about Maschine is that it's really easy to sidechain things. So if you want to kind of get your track to glue together, using sidechain to basically use, like, for example, the kick drum to sidechain the compression happening in the pad, for example. So it's really, really simple to do. So you can see in my sound chain here, I basically have the instruments, and then I've got this sort of reverb unit, and then the compressor after that, and there's kind of a delay. So in the compression settings, you have all your basic settings here, like threshold, knee, amount, attack, release, all the kind of things you'd see on a normal compressor. And then the input source is literally just a matter of dialing in which pad from which group you want to send as the source. So you can hear it now. It's just the pad and the drums. So I don't know if you can hear that, how the kick drum is basically side-chaining the pad, just sort of giving it a bit of movement and sort of holding the sounds together. Okay, so the one thing we're still missing is bass. That's basically the next instrument I added, using Native Instruments Massive for the main bass sound. I'll just solo the bass for you so you guys can hear it. It's really low. I don't know if that's even coming through there. It's a very low frequency. But sort of to beef the sound up, because it was so low, basically using things like the saturator to sort of give it a little bit of distortion. You can kind of hear it when you push the distortion a little bit harder. You can hear that. It just, with all the background noise, sounds a little bit like a rumble, but you can get a really nice balance between a sort of smooth, warm sound and an overly aggressive, distorted sound. And then using things like the metaverb, really good for just building space, giving things sort of a good sort of stereo image. And then again, using a compressor at the end, the drums basically side-chaining the drums side-chaining the bass. So let me take that off. Okay, and this next pad. Okay, so this sound is actually made up of 3 different instruments. And one of the coolest things you can do with Maschine is you can basically link different sounds together. So you can see here, on this first pad, I'm using a Reactor plugin. On the second pad, I'm using Reactor again, but it's a different preset. So it's basically 2 instances of Reactor, and then a 3rd instance of Reactor. So these are all separate sounds. And what Maschine allows you to do is, if you go into pad mode, you can basically select all the pads. So if I just go select, go multi, select all those pads, so those 3 different sounds together, And if I go into pad mode, you can see I've selected them to link group 1. So basically what that means is all these sounds I can now control from one keyboard controller, and it'll basically play all those sounds layered on top of each other. So as a sound design tool, it's incredibly powerful. You can basically layer an almost infinite number of different plugins and synthesizers over each other just to get one sound. So it's giving you a lot of depth in that respect. So let's go into the keyboard just for one, just so you can hear it. Okay, so you can see all the 3 different synths playing there. And what you can do, for example, with mix mode, is you can mix the relative levels of those sounds together, so giving you even more control. So if I just take these other 2 out for the moment, let me just unlink them. Just the one sound on its own. And then that sort of high-pitched sound as well. So you've got a lot of control over how you kind of put your sounds together. And remember, I'm doing all this without even looking at the computer screen, which is kind of the main point of it, is you don't really have to ever reference the software. Okay, so let's have a listen to that sound. So again, just kind of giving like a really sort of interesting pad sound, a stab that just gives the whole thing a bit of movement. Okay. All right, so you've probably heard vocals in this as well, right? So there's a couple like vocal stabs happening. This was recorded with the help of Viv May. If you want to come on up here, Viv. So Viv and I went into a studio and we basically recorded these samples for this particular set. So I'll just play you basically what's here at the moment. Cool. So I have all these different notes that I basically sampled with Viv's help. Well, she sang them, so it was definitely with her help. And then the other thing we sampled was just some sort of lines that I could sort of throw in whenever I needed, like these. So again, just something I can kind of add like to the performance just from throwing it out. So what we're going to show you now is we're going to resample some of these ideas. So I think let's like these ones, just the lines. We'll just like run through them, and I'm going to show you guys how easy it is to use the live sampler. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to select a new pad. Just see we got playback here. Going to go into sample mode, record mode. Hello?
Hello. 1, 2.
Okay. I don't know if you guys are going to be able to hear Viv while we're doing this. Can you hear her? Cool. All right.
Okay.
So it's very, very simple. There's a couple of different ways you can set up your sampling. The way I've got it set at the moment, you can basically set the length to 1 bar, 2 bar, 4 bars, 8, 16 bars, or you can just set it to free, which is what I'm going to do now. I'm going to let it record. Viv's going to try a couple of ideas, and then we're going to hear something, cut it up, and put it into the track. I'm just going to show you guys how easy it is to do with Maschine.
All right.
Are you ready?
Let's go.
Okay, so let's have a look at what we got there. Unfortunately, you guys can see the waveform here. So this is probably the worst environment to record vocals in, unfortunately. But you can obviously see we can get a definition of where the actual lines were. So let's say we wanted to just grab that first little bit there. We'll go into sample editing, find the start points that we want, and we can use these controls to basically zoom in and out. So I really just want to find exactly where that start point is. Looks like it's about there. And let's have a look and see where the end point is. So I kind of want to take it till about there. Okay, so if I zoom out again, basically that's the sample I want. It's by default it's set to truncate, which is just going to chop everything I don't want and just basically put that sample. So I'm just going to hit apply. And there we have the sample ready to go. So now I can just basically bring this sound in. Again, I can control the sort of overall volume of it. Like you can hear it's quite quiet in here. So just on the sort of volume selector section here, I just click on the sound that I've just recorded. Cool. So once the sampling's done, I can go into the actual sampler itself and I can select a number of different ways to do it. So I can do things like change the pitch. Sorry. So you just have loads of control over how you sort of play around with the sound. I can select the type. So if I select, for example, to one shot, it'll just play through when I hit it. If I select it to ADSR, so in envelope mode, it'll stop when I let go. So again, just having a lot more control over how I use the sound. So should we try another one? All right, so let's get another one down. So it's going to go back into sampling, start recording whenever you're ready. Yeah. Okay. Remember, you can do this without ever hitting the stop button. You could basically do this while the track's running. I'm stopping it now so I can kind of like show you guys exactly what I'm doing. But the whole beauty of the sort of sampling system is you can build the track as you go. You never have to even stop it. You can just keep the music going in the background. So again, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to just find that second one. It sounded pretty cool. So just go to the edits. Find the points. And again, hit truncate. And now I have... And then it's just a matter of basically performing them into the track. Cool. Okay, so the very last thing I want to show you guys is the macro system. And basically what macros allow you to do, because if you think about all the plugins you're using, all the different samplers, the sounds, the plugins, compressors, all that kind of stuff is going to have so many different parameters. And especially if you're thinking about Maschine as a performance tool, you're going to want to distill that down. So what Maschine allows you to do is basically take the most important controls and assign them to sort of a front end. So, for example, on the master here, if I hit macro, these are basically like 3 controls that I mapped earlier for like an overall delay, and then it's got like a res synthesizer as well. So So again, I don't have to go into like page after page after page of parameters. I can take my most important ones and just have them laid out there. Great. Thank you guys very much.